She was a shadow in the corner of the massive military tailoring shop. For 8 years, that is all she had been, a shadow, a whisper, a pair of hands that worked from sunrise to sunset without a single word of complaint. Her name was Aliyah, and she was the mute tailor of the Rawalpindi cantonment. The soldiers called her the little ghost because she never spoke, never laughed, and never looked anyone in the eye. She simply stitched. Every morning, before the roosters crowed, Aliyah would slip into the dusty workshop that smelled of khaki cloth, metal buttons, and old thread. Her fingers, thin and scarred from years of needle pricks, moved with the speed of a desert wind. She could sew a torn uniform pocket in under 2 minutes. She could replace a full row of brass buttons on a general's coat without looking down. But she never asked for praise. She never asked for a raise. She simply collected her small bag of coins every Friday and walked home to a tiny room she shared with her aging mother. The other tailors in the shop often wondered about her silence. Why doesn't she talk? A young apprentice once asked the shop supervisor. An old man named Bashir, who had known Aliyah since she first arrived as a skinny teenager. Bashir had sighed and replied, "Some people lose their voice because of an illness. Others lose it because of a wound that never healed. Leave her be. Her needle speaks enough." And indeed, her needle did speak. While other tailors rushed through their work, leaving crooked seams and loose threads, Aliyah's stitches were perfect. Each line of thread was straight as a soldier's spine. Each hem was even as a parade ground. The senior officers who wore her work never knew her name, but they felt the quality. Their uniforms fit better. The collars didn't pinch. The sleeves didn't bind. It was as if the clothes had been made just for them because they had been, by hands that cared more than any mouth could say. But there was something else about Aliyah. Something hidden. Under her plain, gray work-shell kameez, she wore a secret. It was a small patch, no bigger than her palm, stitched onto the inside of her undershirt, right over her heart. It was an insignia silver star with a crescent moon and a tiny cross sword. It was the insignia of the Pakistan Army Special Services Group, the SSG Commandos. Only one kind of person wore that insignia, a soldier. But Aliyah was a woman, a mute woman, a poor tailor. How could she have such a thing? And why did she press her hand to her chest every time she heard a war story on the radio? The answer lay buried in a shallow grave in the mountains of Waziristan. 8 years ago, back then, Aliyah had a voice like a songbird. She was 20 years old, the daughter of a retired army havildar, and she was engaged to a young SSG commando named Haris. Haris was not a tall man, but he carried himself like a mountain. His shoulders were broad, his jaw was sharp, and his laugh was so loud that it could fill an entire parade ground. He and Aliyah had grown up in the same neighborhood, played in the same dusty streets, and fallen in love under the same moon. When Haris joined the SSG, the most feared and respected unit in the army, Aliyah was prouder than any general's wife. One day, Haris had told her, holding her hands in his rough, calloused palms, "I will wear the black beret, and you will sew my insignia onto every uniform I own. And every time you stitch that star, you will know that I am coming home to you." She had laughed then. Her voice had rung out like bells. "Then I will stitch 1,000 stars, Haris, one for every day you are away." But the stars were not enough. On a cold November night, a helicopter landed in the middle of the cantonment with its lights off. 2 officers in dark uniforms walked to the small house where Aliyah lived with her father. They did not knock. They simply stood at the door, their faces carved from stone. Aliyah's father opened the door, saw their expressions, and fell to his knees before they said a single word. "Havildar Sahib," the senior officer said, his voice hollow, "we regret to inform you that Commando Haris bin Yusuf was killed in action last night. He took a bullet while shielding his men during an ambush in the Shawal Valley. He died a hero." Aliyah heard the words from the kitchen. She dropped the glass of water she was holding. It shattered on the floor, just like her heart. She tried to scream. She tried to cry out his name, but no sound came. The grief was so immense, so complete, that it stole her voice right there, in that moment. She opened her mouth, and nothing emerged. Not a whisper. Not a sob. Just silence. The doctors later said it was a rare form of conversion disorder, severe emotional trauma that shut down her vocal cords. But Aliyah knew the truth. Her voice had not been lost. It had been buried alongside Haris in that distant valley. And she decided she would never dig it up again, Her father died of a heart attack 6 months later, unable to bear the loss of his future son-in-law and his daughter's silence in the same year. Aliyah was alone. She had no brothers. Her mother was frail and sick. The army gave them a small pension, but it was barely enough for food. So Aliyah did the only thing she knew how to do, the thing Haris had taught her during their long evenings together. She stitched. Haris had been a strange commando. Most soldiers spent their free time lifting weights or cleaning rifles. Haris spent his free time sewing. His mother had been a master tailor, and she had taught him the art of the needle. He could darn socks, patch torn trousers, and even embroider small flowers. He had taught Aliyah the craft, laughing as he said, "When I am away, you will stitch your loneliness into the fabric. And one day, when I return, you will stitch our happiness." But he never returned. So Aliyah stitched her grief instead. She took a job at the cantonment tailoring shop, working for a pittance, and she poured all her pain into every scene. She stitched uniforms for the very unit that had taken Haris from her. She stitched for colonels and majors, for lieutenants and captains. Some of them had fought alongside Haris. None of them recognized her. Why would they? She was just a mute woman in a gray shalwar kameez, her face hidden behind a thin dupatta, her eyes always downcast, but inside her undershirt, over her heart, she wore Harris's SSG insignia. She had removed it from his blood-soaked uniform when the army returned his belongings, a small box containing his watch, his wedding ring still unworn, and his shredded combat shirt. The insignia had a bullet hole through the star. Aliyah had stitched a tiny patch of khaki cloth behind the hole, so that it looked whole again. And she wore it every single day, pressing her fingers to it whenever she felt the urge to scream. 8 years passed like this. 8 years of silence. 8 years of needles and thread. 8 years of watching young soldiers come and go, some returning in uniforms, others returning in coffins. Aliyah aged beyond her years. Her hair turned gray at 30. Her fingers became bent like old tree roots. But her stitches remained perfect. Her work remained flawless. And then, one ordinary Tuesday afternoon, everything changed. The tailoring shop received an urgent order. A 3-star general was visiting the cantonment for an inspection, and his dress uniform needed last-minute alterations. The general was a legend, General Rashid Khurram, known as the Lion of Siachen for his bravery in the highest battlefield on earth. He was a tall, broad-shouldered man with a white beard and eyes that had seen too much death. He demanded perfection in everything, from his soldier salutes to the crease in his trousers. The uniform was brought to the shop in a sealed bag. The supervisor, Bashir, looked at the complex alterations and panicked. The general's waist had shrunk slightly, the sleeves needed to be shortened by half an inch, and a button on the collar had come loose. The other tailors refused to touch it. "One mistake, and we will be court-martialed," they whispered. Bashir turned to the corner where Aliyah sat, her head bowed over a pile of torn field jackets. "Aliyah," he said, his voice trembling. "Only you can do this, please." She looked up. Her eyes, dark and deep as wells, met his. She nodded once. She took the general's uniform home that night. She worked by the light of a single oil lamp in her tiny room, her mother sleeping on a sharp eye in the corner. Her hands moved with the precision of a surgeon. She shortened the sleeves, tapering the cuffs so they would fit perfectly over the general's thick wrists. She adjusted the waist, taking it in just enough to make the coat hug his torso without pulling. She replaced the loose button, stitching it with a cross pattern that would never come undone. And then, she saw it. The inside pocket of the coat, just over the left breast. It was torn. Not badly, just a small rip where the general must have caught it on a branch or a door handle. Any other tailor would have ignored it. The pocket was hidden. No one would ever see it, but Aliyah was not any other tailor. She remembered what Haris had told her. A soldier's uniform is his second skin. If the skin is torn, the soldier bleeds. Always mend the hidden wounds first, so she took out her needle and thread, and she began to repair the inside pocket. As she worked, her fingers brushed against something inside the pocket. A piece of paper, folded and faded, yellowed with age. Without thinking, she pulled it out. It was a photograph. A small, black and white photograph of a young SSG commando, no older than 25, grinning at the camera. He was wearing a black beret and a combat vest. His arm was wrapped around the shoulders of another soldier, a younger man with a shy smile and kind eyes. The days that followed the parade ground miracle were unlike anything Aliyah had ever experienced. For 8 years, she had moved through the world like a leaf blown by an invisible wine scene, but not noticed, present, but not acknowledged. Now, suddenly, everyone wanted to know her. Reporters came to the tailoring shop with cameras and notepads. Officers who had never spoken to her before stopped to salute. Young soldiers asked for her blessings before going on dangerous missions. The little ghost had become a living legend, but Aliyah did not want to be a legend. She wanted to stitch. She wanted to go back to her corner, her needle, her thread, and her quiet memories of Haris. The attention felt like sandpaper on a raw wound. Every interview, every photograph, every request for a speech scraped away the protective numbness she had built over nearly a decade. She was grateful to General Khurram deeply, painfully grateful, but she was also terrified. Her voice had returned, but she did not yet know what to say with it. General Khurram, however, was not a man who left things unfinished. A week after the parade, he visited Aliyah in her tiny room. He had to stoop to get through the doorway. He looked at the single oil lamp, the thin mattress on the floor, the aging mother coughing in the corner, and his jaw tightened with a mixture of anger and shame. This is how the army takes care of its own. He muttered to his aide, "This woman gave everything. Her love, her voice, her youth. And we left her in a room smaller than my bathroom." He turned to Aliyah, who was sitting on the floor with a half-repaired field jacket in her lap. "You are moving," he said. It was not a request. "Tomorrow. A proper house. Near the cantonment. With running water, electricity, and a bed." Aliyah shook her head. She pointed at her mother, then at her needle, then at the door, a silent gesture that meant, "This is enough. I need nothing more." The general knelt down, bringing his eyes level with hers. He was an old man now, past 60, with knees that cracked when he bent. But his eyes were as sharp as ever. "Aliyah," he said softly, "Haris was like a son to me. I trained him. I led him into battle. I held him when he took his first bullet and laughed it off. And I carried his body off the helicopter when they brought him home. I have spent 8 years wondering if there was anything I could have done differently. Anything that would have brought him back to you." He paused, swallowing hard. "I cannot bring him back, but I can take care of you. Let me do this. Not as a general. As a father who lost a son." Aliyah stared at him for a long moment. Then she reached out and placed her hand on his weathered cheek. She nodded, and for the second time in a week, she spoke. "Thank you," she whispered. Her voice was still rough, but it was growing stronger. "Haris called you Baba. He said you were the father he never had." The general closed his eyes. A single tear escaped and disappeared into his white beard. The new house was modest by army standards: 2 bedrooms, a small kitchen, a courtyard with a single mulberry tree, but to Aliyah, it was a palace. She had never lived in a place with a locking door and windows that let in the sunlight. Her mother wept with joy when she saw the clean floors and the electric ceiling fan. For the first time in years, Aliyah slept through the night without waking to the sound of her own silent screams, but the general was not done. He had noticed something else during his visit to the tailoring shop. Aliyah's skills were extraordinary. She could look at a uniform and see problems that other tailors missed: a weakened seam here, a poorly placed button there, a collar that would chafe after hours of wear. She was not just a tailor. She was a master craftsman. And the army had a terrible need for such skills. In the remote posts along the border, soldiers were dying not just from bullets, but from the cold. Their uniforms were standard issue, designed for the mild winters of the plains, not the killing freeze of the high mountains. Frostbite was as deadly as any enemy. Soldiers lost fingers, toes, even entire limbs because their gear failed them. The army had tried to buy better uniforms from foreign companies, but the costs were astronomical, and the quality was often worse than what they already had. General Khurram had an idea. A radical, unprecedented, almost insane idea. He wanted Aliyah to design a new combat uniform. Not just repair old ones, design them from scratch. He wanted her to use her 8 years of experience, her knowledge of every rip, tear, and weakness in the current gear, to create something better. Something that would keep soldiers alive. When he proposed this to Aliyah, she looked at him as if he had asked her to fly to the moon. "Me," she whispered. "I am just a tailor. A woman who never finished school. I cannot design uniforms." The general leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "You have finished a different kind of school, Aliyah. The school of grief. The school of silence. You have seen every failure in our gear because you have spent 8 years fixing those failures. You know where the seams break. You know which buttons pop off. You know which fabrics chafe and which ones breathe. The best designers in the world sit in air-conditioned offices and draw pictures on computers. You have sat on a dusty floor with a needle in your hand and a soldier's life in your heart. You are exactly the person I need. Alia looked down at her hands. Her bent, scarred, beautiful hands. The hands that had stitched Harris's insignia over her heart. The hands that had mended a general's hidden pocket. The hands that had worked in silence while the world forgot her. I will try, she said. What followed was the most difficult year of Alia's life. She was given a small workshop in the cantonment, a budget, and a team of 3 young tailors who looked at her with a mixture of awe and confusion. They had heard the story of the mute woman who made a general cry, but they had not seen her work. That changed quickly. On the first day, Alia took a standard issue winter jacket and cut it open along every seam. She laid the pieces on a large table and studied them like a surgeon studying a patient. She ran her fingers over the fabric, feeling the weave, the weight, the density. She sniffed the lining, checking for chemical treatments that trapped moisture. She even tasted a loose thread, an old tailor's trick to test the fiber content. Her team watched in stunned silence. "What is she doing?" whispered one of the young men, a recent graduate of a design institute, the oldest tailor in the group, a grizzled man named Rafiq, who had worked with Alia for years, smiled. "She is listening. The fabric speaks to her. It tells her where it hurts." Alia worked 16 hours a day for 3 months. She rejected 100 different fabrics before finding one that was both warm enough for the mountains and light enough for long marches. She designed a new pocket system based on the way soldiers actually moved, not the way manuals said they should move. She added reinforced patches on the elbows and knees, areas that wore out first. She created a hidden inner pocket over the heart, a small, almost invisible detail, because she remembered that every soldier, no matter how tough, carried something precious close to their chest. A letter, a photograph, a small flag, and she added one more thing. On the inside collar of every uniform, she stitched a tiny silver star, the same star from Harris's SSG insignia, not visible from the outside. A secret, a promise, a reminder that someone who had lost everything was still fighting to protect those who wore the uniform. When the prototype was ready, General Kurum himself came to test it. He wore the new jacket for a week straight, sleeping in it, marching in it, even taking it into a cold chamber that simulated the brutal winds of the Saikan Glacier. He emerged with a rare smile on his face. "It's better than anything we have ever bought," he told the Army's procurement committee. "And it costs half as much. This woman has done what our contractors could not do in 20 years. The committee approved the new uniform for a trial run with 1 battalion, the same battalion where Horace had served. When the soldiers received their new gear, they noticed the silver star on the collar. They asked about it. And when they heard the story of Alia, the mute tailor who had turned her grief into protection, they began to call the uniform the widow's stitch. But the trial run revealed a problem. The uniforms were excellent, but Alia's small workshop could not produce enough of them. The army needed thousands, tens of thousands. Factories had to be involved. Mass production. Machines, not hands. And machines could not replicate Alia's precision. They could not feel the fabric. They could not see the hidden weaknesses. They could not stitch the tiny silver star with the same loving care. The committee decided to compromise. The bulk of the uniforms would be made in factories, but every single one would be inspected by Alia's team. And every single one would receive the silver star hand-stitched by Alia herself. That meant she would have to stitch over 100,000 stars. 1 for every soldier who would wear the new uniform. 1 for every soldier who might come home alive because of better gear. Alia did not complain. She sat down in her workshop, threaded her needle, and began to stitch. 1 star, 10 stars, 100, 1,000. Her fingers moved faster than ever, but they also ached more than ever. The arthritis that had been creeping into her joints for years now flared up with a vengeance. Some nights, she could not hold a cup of tea because her hands were too cramped. But she did not stop.